In a dark, spooky world where fear takes over, get ready to face the unknown. Welcome to a place where nightmares come alive, where shadows hide secrets, and every breath sends shivers down your spine. Take a deep breath as you step into a realm that will test your courage. Lock your doors, hold on to hope, for within these depths, something sinister awaits. Prepare yourself for a journey into true terror. Inside this shed were several road signs, caution signs, no parking signs, and even a stop sign. There were also milk crates of belongings. 8 tracks to cassette tapes to kids. Rod Stewart's greatest hits was among them, and clothing. From the 80s to the 2000s, there were men and women's shoes, jackets and windbreakers, seeds and tapes like things you would find in a car. There were also suitcases. Why would all this be locked in the shed, surrounded by a dog kennel, with big blue barrels out back? If these belongings were the landlord's, wouldn't he have taken them? Why leave them here? Why lock them away? Did those items belong to other people? Did those items come from those cars? Speaking to my brother recently about how this haunts me, he gave me some disturbing intel. Apparently in the falling water area of TN in the 80s and 90s, there were people who went missing. My brother also reminded me of the mounds and how the landlord wanted to build a house on them. The mounds were, as best as I could guess, limestone. Chipped pieces, like many dump trucks, had come and gone, filling the prairie with sedimentary rock. Layers and layers filled mounds around 5 acres of the property. I remember jumping on them and wishing I had a dirt bike. One summer, I set the entire area on fire. The grass on the limestone mounds was a dry grass, easy to flame with the slightest spark. I decided to do a bet with a buddy and set my bare ass on a fire ant mound. The ending of the tale: don't do that. To get even with these bastards, I took a spray can of deodorant and a lighter and went biblical on this anthill. The dried grass went up faster than my mind could think. I had to pull my friend out and even wet the trees so they didn't light a blaze. Looking back, the mounds don't make any sense. I am not an architect, but why would a person want to build a house on top of loose limestone? Why would you fill in an area with loose rocks to then build a foundation? Wouldn't dirt suffice? Why were they mounds and not a flat area? So we have the acidic plastic barrels behind the shed, the old, derelict, and stripped cars. We have the limestone mounds and all of the belongings in the shed. It's far enough away for no one to hear you scream, and on a huge plot of land. All of these together form red flags. The part my brother mentioned, which bothers me the most, is that our stepfather was nice to this guy. The landlord, I mean. Our stepdad was an asshole, young and dumb, and full of piss and fight. He never showed respect, especially to older men. Around this landlord, however, he was submissive. It was like he was scared or put off. However it goes down, I keep having nightmares about this property. It almost feels as though I am being beckoned. I am unsure after all this time who lives there, or if the property is even inhabited. I know I have to find out the truth, so I am going tonight. My wife will be fully pissed, but I have to bury this. Maybe I will expose a killer. Maybe the spirits of those taken need me to be their voice, to close their cold cases once and for all. Maybe I just need to know if it is all in my head. If I don't come back, look to the mounds, or the shed, or the barrels. I'm stuffed away in there somewhere. Sometimes you live through things that haunt you. Sometimes, no matter how many years go by, you can't seem to break free from a place or a memory. There is a place like that for me. When I was in the 6th grade, my family moved to a place in the sticks. It was a place called Falling Water. The drive-in was breathtaking. Watching the stream cascade down the rocks was the best part of going home. But there was always something off about that place. Our home was a trailer, situated in the bottom of a mountain on a 17-acre field. The property was wonderful. It had all of the redneck things a young country kid would ever need. An old barn, a shed with a dog pen surrounding it, a creek with a fish pond, and old derelict vehicles strewn about. My brother and I would spend summers on that land, playing on a john boat in the pond, or getting tricked into snipe hunting by our stepfather. That night was horrible. We were marched out to the old barn on the edge of our property with only flashlights. Our uncle and stepfather made noises to scare us, and scare us it did. There were these large limestone piles in the front of the property, big enough to jump a bike on. We were so far back from the main road, the cops didn't even want to drag up our driveway when we called. It was a cut-in on the side of a hill, with a mountain spring and pond, and we were way out there. Just a trailer in the center, no one to hear us scream. Looking back on this period, my brother and myself have drawn several, uneasy conclusions. To be fair, I am not condemning anyone or saying this is for sure a real story. I can say the things I say are real, but I could also be wrong. Before I start a witch hunt, I want that to be clear. But for anyone who can try to see the signs, the possibilities cannot be ruled out. The first thing we agreed upon were the barrels. They were large and blue and plastic of some kind. It was a thick plastic too. We found 2 of them behind the shed. They were stacked between the shed and the fence, facing the hedgerow behind the house. See, the shed was smaller than the barn and was locked, and a large dog pen surrounded it. We used to keep our pit bull Gypsy in there. We didn't open the shed for a long time, but we will get to that. Right now, I want to focus on the barrels. They were the kind Jeffrey Dahmer used to boil his victims' pieces in acid. Stacked behind a locked shed, these guys just sat there in the elements. My brother and I couldn't move one of them. The other was light as if empty. So we did what any kid would. We cut a square out of the belly to make a bushcraft boat. We used climbing rope and 5-gallon buckets as pontoons. We even made a homemade paddle. The weird thing is, when we used this barrel as a boat, we didn't wash it. It had a strong chemical smell, and my brother and I both got serious chemical burns on our skin after setting sail. What could have been in that barrel that could cause our skin to burn? Some type of chemical, maybe some kind of acidic residue. It bothers me to think about it. What if that plaything we laughed and sank in was some poor soul's tomb? The second thing my brother and I agree upon is the amount of derelict vehicles. We had 2 old Plymouth Dusters out by the barn, early to mid-80s I'd guess, possibly earlier. A few Jeep Cherokees also sat gutted in the yard. It sounds bad and backwoods, but on 17 acres it isn't as obviously white trash. These cars ranged from 1975 to 1995. Every one of them were gutted. Now our landlord owned a shop away from town, where he fixed up cars, so we always figured those old cars were going to go to his shop one day. Why then were they gutted? No stereo, no carpets, no nothing. No signs of anyone ever being proud to buy that thing off the lot. They just sat there like empty time capsules, like someone forgot to finish them. We played around, and I never really investigated them deep. The one time I climbed in the tan Jeep, I took a red wasp sting to the eyelid. I know what you're thinking. It is probably just my imagination running wild. It most likely is me seeing signs I want to see, rather than what is. That is very likely, and to be honest, I hope it's the truth. It could just be a dark time in my childhood, and my brain is remembering things wrong. I hope all of that is true, but in my heart, I know I am not mistaken. The shed. The shed in the middle of the dog kennel. It was newer than the barn, much newer in fact. It had a master lock on the door. It was weathered, but nothing a gas-powered pressure washer couldn't fix. It is the shed with the barrels we found. It is the shed we busted the lock on. There's something about the crunch of leaves under my boots that reminds me of death. Walking down an unlit path to get back to my house, I'm regaled with that feeling with every passing step as I travel through the park. A shortcut between my home and a friend's Halloween party. This is the first in a long time that I have taken this route, because I don't usually mind the extra time walking, and you never know who you can bump into in the woods. I see a lamppost up ahead. providing a dim light of oasis in an otherwise desert of darkness. My footsteps become more frequent against the pavement and the crunch of the leaves. I pass under the lamppost and feel the temporary serenity of protection from the light around me. It's tempting to stop and bask in it, but this will only delay the long walk home to get to my secure location. I hear faint crunches in the dark behind me, and I subtly turn my head without bringing too much attention to the fact that I'm skittish. I'm not easily spooked, but that doesn't mean I don't have the common sense reaction of feeling vulnerable when walking alone at night on a path surrounded by trees. Nothing but the darkness and the faint silhouette of the oak trees all around me. It's a full moon tonight, but that does little good against the thick canopy of the park I, for some inexplicable reason, have decided to jaunt through on this October night. My pace quickens again after I pass through the halo of light, and after 100 feet, I look back at the glowing light to see if there is another traveler behind me, or if it's just the autumn night playing tricks on me. Again, nothing. Relieved, my feet return to my normal pace, and my mind is soothed. Another crunch. I jerk my head back, unable to play it cool as I had before, and again see nothing. My heart is racing and my steps begin to match it. There's another lamppost a few hundred feet in front of me, which temporarily reduces my anxiety. As I pass under it, my feeling of oasis has transitioned to a fear of being under a spotlight for all the darkness to see, with the light blinding me to all that the woods have to offer. A shiver runs up my spine and settles on top of my head. I look back at the light after passing another 100 feet, and I see it. A shadow darts across the halo of light as quickly as an ember flying away from a bonfire. Questions arise in my head. Did I really see that, or am I just letting the season get the best of me? Regardless, I begin to think about how fast I can get home without going into a full sprint. My hands instinctively go into my coat pockets and my legs move as fast as they can, while always having one foot on the ground. One last bend before I get to the clearing and can escape to my modest home that now seems like a fortress I desperately need to be safe. I see the streetlights through the trees, and I know that home is just within reach, but I'm almost paralyzed by the approaching sound of crunching behind me. The steps are quicker than mine and close enough so that I can hear them even if they don't step on the dead leaves on the path. I get through the woods and onto the street, and without thinking, my walk turns into a run as I go up my sidewalk, up my steps, fumbling with my keys as I open my front door and quickly shut it behind me and slide the deadbolt into the locked position. True oasis. I put my back against the closed door and exhale. But before I can draw another breath, I turn around and look out the spy hole. It wasn't tricks, and it wasn't the season. A shadow in the shape of a person steps out of the woods and is sauntering towards my sidewalk. Maybe it was someone who left the party just after me and lies near me. I tell myself, knowing it's a comforting lie. Maybe it's someone who was lost in the woods without a light and just followed someone who looked like they knew where they were going. Telling myself another lie. I watch with horror as the shadow stops briefly in front of my house and begins to walk even more slowly up my sidewalk, following the steps I had taken not 30 seconds earlier. I hold my breath, fearing that the shadow can hear me on the other side of the door, and I can hear my heart pounding on the inside of my chest. As the shadow walks up the steps, it pauses at the top. The locked door dividing us now feels as thin as paper, and I weigh the consequences of sliding my couch in front of the door as a reinforcement versus the idea of creating that much noise. I remain still and keep my eye fixed on the spy hole. It seems paralysis made the decision for me. The shadow takes 3 steps closer to my front door, and it no longer remains a shadow, but what I see makes me desperately wish it maintained the mystery the shadow probed. As it comes into the dull glow of the full moon, I can see its eyes, or rather lack thereof, where its eyes are as just smooth, pale skin, as though the eyelids had fused together. As I scan down the flat nose and thin lips of the shadow's face, I see protruding downwards from its mouth are 2 white points, teeth. 2 abnormally long canines protruding from what is otherwise a demonic-looking shadow on my front steps. My heart stops and I can feel a burst of air come from my mouth. This is just a sick joke from someone at the party. Again, lies I tell myself. I want to run away, but my eye is magnetized to the spy hole. As I see the shadow inquisitively look around my porch, I glance at the end of my sidewalk. I look past it at first, but as my eyes focus, I see a second shadow standing there and begin to slowly walk up the sidewalk. My body repulses internally, but my head doesn't move, and my eye stays fixed on the shadows. At the top of the steps, the second shadow says in a low mumble, "In there." "Yes, not 2 minutes ago," replied my stalker in the woods. "Good, this shouldn't be too hard at all." "Nice work," replied the newcomer, who seemed to be in charge. I'm finally able to turn around and my head is swimming. My first thought is the only one I can manage as I try to formulate a plan. Do I have a crucifix? What do I have that can be fashioned as a stake? What can I say? I'm a product of the horror movies and scary stories I grew up on, never expecting that it would ever teach something useful. I run to my bedroom and open a trunk at the foot of my bed. Digging through some knickknacks, I find it, a crucifix that had been used at my grandma's funeral that my parents gave to me, hoping it would spark some sort of new engagement with the church I had lost interest in many years ago. I break off a leg of a chair at my kitchen table, and while it doesn't look like they do in the movies, I've fashioned a wood stake that will certainly be good enough for my purposes. Returning to my front door, I steal one last look out of the spy hole and see one shadowy figure still on my porch. Where the other one went, I couldn't say, but I'll take it as a good sign and feel some relief. I muster as much of my courage as the situation allows, and I slowly slide the deadbolt until the door is unlocked. Even more slowly, I turn the handle until there is nothing between me and the shadow except the door loose on its hinges. I count to 3 in my head and fling the door open. With my right hand, I wildly swing the chair leg in a downward motion, while my left holds the crucifix exactly how I've seen it done at all the movies. After 3 swings of the stake, hitting nothing but air, I realize there's nothing on my front porch. Adrenaline coursing through my veins, I step forward to the top of the stars, clutching the crucifix so hard I can feel it puncturing my skin. Nothing. Breath escapes me, but I can't breathe in. I turn around and calmly walk back inside and close my door. Resting my back against my front door, I remember how to breathe. With my mind racing, I return to the spy hole. "I can wait here all night," I say out loud, knowing that I almost certainly won't. Seconds crawl by, but they feel like hours as I finally start to relax. I slide the deadbolt back into the locked position and start to feel sane again. The deadbolt clicks in the locked position, and the tension is leaving my body. As I begin to remove my eye from the spy hole, I feel 2 long teeth sink into my neck just below my ear. It was Halloween night. My parents had just left with my little brother to go to a party at the middle school. I didn't go because I was in the 11th grade and just spent the day drowning from essays and tests. So I wasn't in the mood to spend my night watching kids scream in terror from people in rubber masks and styrofoam skeletons. Once they left, I hopped on the couch and scrolled through the horror channels. I eventually found a movie that seemed interesting, The Not So Good Dead, directed by Sam Raimi. I put the bright orange candy bowl on the porch and started to watch the movie, but I couldn't focus. I was too worried about my family. Halloween was never my favorite holiday. Even trick or treating never piqued my interest, not even as a kid, especially with all the disappearances happening in the city. The Halloween before, 5 teenagers and an entire family went missing. 2 weeks later, the police found the body of a missing teenager, if you can even call it a body. They were missing their head, and they were missing their intestines. The police say it was most likely an animal, like a bear or wolf, that came down from the mountains and caught them on their way home. The other teenagers and the missing family have still not been found to this day, but the loved ones of the missing have accepted that they are gone, and they're never coming back. As I was stuck in my train of thought, the grandfather clock my dad kept struck 9. I didn't think much of it until I realized that my family should have been back hours ago, and my mind started to assume the worst had happened. I sprung up from the couch and raced to my cell phone, but before I could reach it, I heard a knock on the front door. No kids should have been out at that time, so why was someone knocking on the door? If it was my dad or mom, they have a house key, so they wouldn't need to knock. It must have been some kids ding-dong ditching houses. That was my thought until there was a second set of knocks. I ignored all of my instincts and decided to call my dad. With the dial of the first 3 numbers, there was a loud bang on the door. I continued to dial until loud, rapid banging started to hit the door. I frantically dialed the rest of the numbers. I pressed call, and what I heard made my blood run cold. I held the phone to my ear. No service. As I removed the phone from my ear, I noticed that the banging had stopped. I turned to look at the door and froze. Looking at me from the mail slot of the front door was a glassy, white eye. When our eyes locked, the mail slot closed, making a loud clank noise that echoed through the house. I then heard footsteps walk away from the door into the distance, but I could still feel its ominous presence. I thought it was over. Then the power to the house was cut off. My reaction was to kneel and keep quiet. What was probably just seconds felt like hours in the darkness of the empty house. When I got a hold of my nerves, I slowly and scarcely stood up. I then collected all of the strength I had left and said, "Who's there?" When I finished the question, footsteps rushed to the door, and they started banging, kicking, and even scratching at the door. Whatever it was, it wasn't going to stop until it got to me. That was clear. I started to take a step back. Then it let out a loud screeching noise that was a mix of a bat and a deer. No human being could make a noise as terrifying as that. The door started to crack and bend from the force of the creature. I didn't know what to do, but I didn't have time to decide. The door broke off the hinges, falling to the ground, making a loud sound of wood hitting tile. I ran into the kitchen to arm myself. I grabbed a knife from the drying rack, and I turned around to see what had broken down the front door. Nothing. There was nothing there, just the broken door. But that wasn't the part that scared me. What scared me was past the door. There was nothing. No light to houses, not even the street. It was just a thick fog that swallowed my home. There was then a sound from above my head. A scraping sound, claws ripping up the drywall of the ceiling. I didn't need to look up because the creature dropped in front of me. It wasn't human. Its flesh was falling off the bone. Its arms were so long they were touching the floor, and a horrid smell of roadkill filled my nose. As I struggled not to vomit at the sight, I noticed it wasn't looking at me. It was facing up and looking at the freshly made claw marks in the ceiling and smiling with genuine joy. It then made a sound that still haunts my soul to this day. It was a whining sound, almost like an animal, but at the same time, not even close. I tried to take a step back, but with the creak of the floorboard, the creature snapped its neck downwards to look at me. I was so caught off guard that I fell back. When I hit the ground, the noise stopped, and I looked up. Now I could see its face. Its skull was wrapped in rotting flesh and dark veins. I vomited from the mixture of sight and smell. The creature then let out a cackle, almost like a hyena, as if it found enjoyment from seeing me in that state. Once I was done being sick, I dashed the stairs, but before I could make it to the first step, the creature, with what felt like a truck, slapped me with the back of its skinny and rotted hand. I was sent flying to the other side of the kitchen. With no doubt, I knew my arm was broken. I looked to my right and saw the knife, with the creature slowly walking up to me. I grabbed the knife with my non-broken arm. I pointed the knife towards the creature, ready for the end. I closed my eyes, accepting my fate, counting my last breaths. I hear the creature, smelling the air. Whatever scent the creature caught was making it salivate. The creature then looked towards the cabinet and rushed it with animalistic movements. With both hands, the creature ripped the cabinet door off its hinges. Cereals and snacks fly across the kitchen. The creature then pulls out an old bag of candy corn that no one ate. It then starts walking towards the broken front door. Before the creature makes it to the door, it stops. It looks at the puddle of vomit on the floor and starts playing with it. It then picks up a piece of chocolate from the puddle, looks at it, and says in my own but demonic voice, "Bad candy," and then rushes out the door into the fog. The moment that the creature left, the entire house shook. I stumbled to look out the window and see that the fog had dissipated. My legs finally gave out and I collapsed to the floor. While I was fighting to stay awake, I heard the shattering of a window. It was my newly widowed neighbor. I could hear his screams and him begging for his life. I then heard the slashing and ripping of flesh, along with screams of agony. I then blacked out from exhaustion. I was then woken up by the frantic calling of my dad. "Are you ok?" I couldn't see well, but I could make out the tears in my dad's eyes and the silhouette of my mom and brother crying. I then woke up in the hospital with a cast and bandages on my ribs. I still had the screams of my neighbor ringing in my ears. The police ended up asking my family questions. My family chalked it up to a robbery gone wrong. I also said it was a robbery because no one was going to believe me anyway. But I know what happened that night. Afterward, everything seemed to be back to normal, but I was still having nightmares every week. I eventually told them about that night, but they just told me that I was watching too many scary movies. A couple of weeks later, they found my neighbor's body. It was like the missing teenagers, but this time in place of his intestines was candy corn. A new family moved into his house a month later. Hopefully, they won't have to experience the horror I did on Halloween. I wish I could have done more to help him. A mild night in the New England countryside. An empty field with an omnipresence of untrimmed grass and wild weeds left to grow unabated. The field is surrounded by a lumbering audience of trees. The moon casts its glows of judgment. The dim light graciously cast is swallowed by a carpet of fog on the grassy floor. The moon illuminates a young man sitting on an old, long-forgotten crate. Though the man is young, he appears aged and shriveled. His once astute posture eroded into a hunch. His once vibrant and eager eyes were now tired and strained. He wears an old, ragged red fisherman's coat, dotted with off-color red patches from the previous patchwork. Poking out from under his coat is an old faded pair of jeans with the bottom covering an old pair of duck boots. The man holds his head in his hand, using his leg to prop up his arm. His other hand runs through his short hair, then traces his orange stubble beard. He looks down to his side, eyeing the rifle and lantern he had brought. The lantern's flame is extinguished. Instead of holding a young flame, it holds emptiness. For without its flame, it is useless, almost as if an allegory for the man. The man reaches into one of his coat pockets and pulls out an old tarnished locket. He doesn't open it. He just clenches it in his fist while his brow furrows and his eyes clench, reciting memories in his head, some that make him laugh, some that make him angry, some that make him giddy. But they all lead here. They all lead to this field. The best of stories' conclusions take place where they all started, back to the beginning. But life in all actuality is not a story fabricated by an author who possesses the power to turn words into brilliant tragedies and comedies. Yet the man is here. Clouds cover the moon. The once timid light has been completely retracted, and the earth is left in complete darkness. The man is pulled from his stupor by a faint sound. A beautiful sound of classical strings, reminiscent of Beethoven, gingerly penetrates the man's hearing. The music slowly grows somewhat louder as the man makes out a dim light in the tree line. The man, almost startled, slowly gets up from his resting place. He reaches down and picks up his rifle with caution. The light slowly emerges from the foggy tree line with the background drum of classical music. There are supposed to be no houses or buildings for 16 miles of this field. As the light slowly wafts towards him, the man can make out the rough outline of a human figure. But the figure does not move, it seems to glide. It moves in such an elegant manner, graceful almost, accompanied by the soothing sound of classical music. The man is almost paralyzed, like he's under a spell, unable to move. All he can do is watch as the angelic life figure ever so slowly moves towards him. Within 30 yards, the man can somewhat see the figure more clearly. It is reminiscent of a woman, one that looks familiar. although she is no woman. As she approaches, she becomes more clear. Her face is grotesque, as if someone tried to replicate a human face, but didn't truly know what a human face looks like. Her arms are long and bony, unnaturally long, bent in ways they shouldn't bend. Her eye sockets are empty, devoid of the most human feature. In their wake, there leaves an empty abyss of nothing, a horrifying nothing. The music was still accompanied by her, growing ever louder the closer she drew. The man's breathing escalates. His heart starts to palpate with fear. Everything should be telling him this is safe. The soft and calming music, the comforting glow in a sea of darkness. But the man knows better. The creature stops 20 feet from the man, allowing him to make it out in all its horrifying beauty. She's so close the man can clearly make out the song that she emits, Moonlight Sonata by Beethoven. Then, like a dying fire, her luminescent glow begins to fade until it's out completely. But the music still remains. The hauntingly beautiful melody gingerly pieces his ears. It penetrates his most inner and sacred thoughts. It engulfs him. The only audible noise that can be heard is the classical melody, but a new noise quietly erupts, a soft yet undeniable sound. The sound of leaves crunching. Then again and again the sound can be heard. The crunching remains continuous, almost methodical in its delivery. The man counts at least 12 steps in total. A lone tear begins to run down the man's cheek. Only a singular tear, but this tear is not the tear found from joy or sadness. This tear comes from anxiety, loneliness, and fear. The only action his body can muster, not an action to fight or to run, but one of repressive dread. Out of the darkness comes an audible sound. A word, a name. Maiko. But the way it's spoken, in such an unnerving manner. As if a dying woman spoke while inhaling, a feeble yet terrifying delivery. The word caused the man to break from his lull, like an old sleeping dog woken from his seemingly endless nap. The man quickly turns around and runs towards the woods, rifle in hand. His boots pound across the grassy floor, one after the other like two cars racing each other, the lead constantly changing. The music still follows him though, he can't escape it. He finally reaches the tree line. He runs into the forest, hoping it to be a safe haven, an area the creature won't follow or will lose him in. An area where he can be free, where the past of the creature won't haunt him. Yet he can still hear the music. As he runs through the forest, the trees look down at him, casting their gazes of judgment like an unamused audience watching a single beleaguered actor desperately try and save his one-man show. As he runs, he passes nothing but trees and bush, no animals or any living presence that he can detect. As if the forest was from a different time, a time long before man's interruption of nature. He runs seemingly forever until he can run no longer. His body begins to ache. It calls for him to stop, but he won't relent, not while he can still hear the music even as it fades. He runs until the only sound that can be heard is the orchestral thud of his boots against the ground. In his desperation and exhaustion, he comes upon a large old decayed oak tree in the middle of the woods. It sits atop a small hill in a minuscule clearing in the woods, like the centerpiece of a once decadent display that's been forgotten to time and left to decay. Its trunk is massive as its rotted gray branches jut out like the arms of a desperate man reaching out for salvation. Finally, at last, he's escaped the sound of the music. The man falls to his knees before the hill, utterly exhausted. Deep within himself, he finds the last saps of strength as he ascends the indomitable hill. Though it is not steep nor high, it's a challenge nevertheless for a fatigued man only fueled by fear. Though fear is the most potent, the most driving emotion a man can feel, it can cause the most rational of man to act in the most irrational and erratic manner. But it can also act as fuel to an exhausted body and mind as the last driving force. Upon his ascension, the man sits and rests against the belly of the tree, leaning his head back and closing his eyes for a minute. The moon once again rears its head from the clouds, casting dim rays of light on the man and his surroundings. The man takes a deep breath as he opens his eyes and punctiliously examines his surroundings, ever looking for the creature to see if he truly escaped, or if his ears had played a cruel and untimely joke on him. Only now does he realize the expressionless beauty of the forest. Like paintings from the Renaissance, beautiful images of endless landscapes unscathed by man. Perfect yet flawed, but the flaws only add to its beauty, like the placement of this tree in the forest. As the man rests his aching body against the lonely tree, an all too familiar sound can be heard faintly in the distance, Moonlight Sonata by Beethoven. I open my eyes, yet they do not see. I reach out with my hands, yet I am constrained. I inhale deeply, but dank air fills my lungs. Where am I? My mind races as I try to remember how I got in this predicament. It is pitch blackness that greets me. It is silence that welcomes me. Loneliness and solitude my only companion. I feel the walls that serve as my prison. Wood. They are roughly cut. I get a splinter in my hand. It seems to be fashioned for my size. It is a near-perfect fit. The walls seem to creak closer, suffocating me. The air in my lungs turns to tar. It slithers down my throat, threatening to choke me. I can't breathe. There is no airflow. No, this isn't true. I feel a tube on the top of my container above my head. There is a hole about the size of a quarter and fresh air is flowing through it. Still, my traitorous lungs heave. It is not lack of oxygen. It is claustrophobia. I am trapped in a tiny box and I don't know how I got here. I can hardly move. There is no light. Panic has seized my limbs, and I beat a steady staccato on the ceiling of my cell. In a rush, I find my voice, and I began to scream, pleading, begging, weeping for anyone to help. This must be an accident. I can't be locked away. I cannot rightly say how long I screamed. Long after my vocal cords became sore, my voice cracked and still my mouth uttered broken words. Eventually, all I could manage was little whimpers. At some point, I passed out. I woke up to the sound of music off in the distance. Sad music. The kind played at a funeral. A dirge. I felt oddly melancholy and reserved. It was a queer experience to be present for one's own funeral. That must be it. I must be buried alive. And now they are having a memorial service at the grave. My voice cracked. My lymph nodes swollen. I could hardly make a squeak, let alone something that would drown out that lonely song. Still, my abused throat tried its hardest to produce some kind of protest to the unfairness of it all. The sound that reverberated in the hollow coffin was that of a dying animal. Perhaps that is exactly what I was in the moment. Trapped, nothing but the thuds of dirt covering my final resting place. Those solid thumps, an assault to my sanity. I couldn't help myself. I grew desperate, tears streaming, snot bubbling, absolutely no care for sensibilities. My fingertips began to bleed as I picked restlessly at the coffin ceiling. Blood ran down my forearms, unchecked. I ravaged my hands trying to escape my cell, yet the stubborn boards would not give. The faint echoes of the gravedigger's task haunted me. My heart shattered with each shovel full of dirt. Every handful of gravel, a final nail in my coffin. It was not a cruel trick. They couldn't hear me, and now there was no hope. I was 6 feet under, yet somehow I was still conscious. What was I to do? I couldn't claw my way through my jail cell, nor could I unbury myself. All motivation fled me. I became stoic in the face of my premortem burial. There was nothing left to do. The funeral song set me at ease. Peace like I have never experienced flooded my mind. I began to chortle. It was all too ironic. Here I am laying in my grave, yet I have never experienced such complete solace. It was as if I waited my whole life for this moment to truly begin living. The dirge tapered off. I was left in silence once again, although this time it didn't bother me. I was over the claustrophobia. The darkness no longer scared me. The lack of companionship no longer a factor. I was awaiting the eternal slumber. No fear, no hesitation. Eyes closed, and everlasting rest. Me and my thoughts, no distractions. I was thinking clearer than I ever had. Life meant something more. A deepening happened. My soul stretched, and the barrier between this life and the next was nearly non-existent. I felt as if I would press against the veil. It would yield. I was where no living mortal had ever been. I lay in my grave alive, yet closer to the hereafter than any living being. The greatest mystery was in my lap. What happens after we die? It was at that moment I heard the whisper. I do hope you are comfy down there. Might be a long time before you get out. I would hate for you to have to spend your last remaining hours in discomfort. The voice was odd, almost as if it didn't belong to a person. It was as rough and cracked as the rustic coffin I was being held hostage, almost as if the man had not communicated often. The words were awkward and not entirely formed in the stranger's mouth, quite like someone learning a new language who has not yet grown confident in his speech. The voice set me on alert. The hair on the back of my neck stood. His voice was like nails on a chalkboard. It was just wrong. Not that it wasn't unpleasant or irritating, but just not natural. Like hearing the mimicking of a parrot speaking human words. The man's voice reverberated down the same pipe the fresh air was flowing. I thought how strange that was. How many coffins have aeration systems built into it? After all, dead men don't need to breathe. Something was wrong. People don't get buried alive by accident. Coffins these days are not roughly crafted pine boxes. Also, no one talks to those under the earth. This man knew something, perhaps could even assist me. I quickly began to plead with the man. Please, sir, I am buried alive. Dig me up, call for help. For the love of God, do something. The man's response caught me off guard. Wrong. Love God? I do not. I can't stop now. You've been selected for Plot 13. This is your home now. Don't worry, I will care for you. Silence enveloped me. I was dumbstruck, completely caught off guard. I never could imagine someone would outright refuse to assist another in their time of need. Life and death are a sacred ritual. No one is that callous. This man held my life in his hands and regarded me with so little care. I was a plaything to him, a pet trapped in a dank, dark cage. In a voice hardly audible, I asked, "What is Plot 13?" Clearly the man anticipated this question. His answer was nearly immediate. He responded, "Plot 13 is the burial spot for David Simon Barnifer, an electrician who accidentally fried himself when he grabbed a live wire." As if this was an afterthought, the man added, "Oh yeah, it's also the resting place for you too." "What? There's no one else down here?" I cried out in indignation. "Of course not. No one in the same coffin. He is directly above you. I'm sure you heard his funeral procession a few hours ago," said the stranger in an oddly cheery voice. I was caught off guard once again by this man's careless, almost teasing manner. It was as if we were old friends or something. What in the hell is going on here? Why am I in this coffin buried underneath someone else? This has to be some kind of accident, I demanded. My captor let out a belly laugh that harbored real mirth. "God, you're slow, aren't ya? I was hoping for someone a little brighter perhaps, but beggars can't be choosers, am I right? You are here, of my design. I snuck into that quaint little apartment you kept on 2nd Street. While you were sleeping, I drugged you. You never heard me come through the unlatched window. I shoved your heavy ass into a rolling suitcase and voila, you woke up inside the coffin I crafted for you. I buried you in Plot 13 in the pre-dug hole for the unfortunate David Barnifer. I am a pretty hard worker. No one even noticed that I dug the hole twice as deep as usual. In the cover of the night, I lowered your coffin into the hole, covered you over with dirt, and no one was the wiser." Absolutely flabbergasted by this man's recounting of the events of the previous night, I asked, "Why? Why? What?" said the man, genuinely perplexed. "Why did you abduct me, burying me alive? What did I do to you to deserve this?" "I don't even know you," I choked out. "We met once. You served me my coffee. You seemed nice, And Mama kept telling me that I needed friends, said the man as if this cleared everything up. So, you buried me alive so I would be your friend. I belted out, completely outraged. All he said was, "Yep. Why the hell didn't you just try talking to me like a normal-ass person?" I shouted. "I did. You were too busy to talk to me. No one takes the time to listen. In some ways, I prefer talking to the dead. They don't interrupt. My mama doesn't approve when I talk to them. Hence why the coffin," responded the man in a matter-of-fact tone. "Because your mom told you to make friends, you kidnapped me," I answered, hardly able to understand. "Mama gets so angry. I can't disobey Mama. She'll put me in the box if I do," said the voice, panic clearly beginning to form. "The box? What do you mean?" I questioned. "I don't want to think about the box. Please don't make me think of the box." As he said this, he began to grow more frantic. I heard a smacking sound followed by a cry of pain. A smack, then pain. This happened in rapid succession. It took me a second to realize the man was hitting himself in the face. Whatever this box was, it had him worked up. A thought creeped into my mind. If I can keep him talking, maybe I will find something I can leverage for escape. This might be my only chance. I figured if I could get him to tell me about this box, maybe I could use this. "You never told me your name. I can't be your friend until I know it," I said. "My name is Dennis. You should know that. You wrote it on my coffee cup and called it out when I came to visit you. It was loud in there, Dennis. I could hardly hear you. Sorry I didn't recognize the voice. I remember you now. I didn't say much to you because I was so nervous. Do you ever get nervous?" At this point, I was fairly certain that he would understand. My goal was simple: get him to think we are friends, then I'd get him to slip some information while his guard is down. "Nervous? Do you get nervous around people too? Mama always said to stop being a baby, but living people scare me. They can think and stuff. The bodies I bury can't do that. They never have mean things to say either. Living people are cruel. I never know what they are thinking or planning. What if they want to hurt me?" exclaimed the excited stranger. "Mama doesn't seem to understand, does she?" I remarked. "No, she doesn't. I tried to explain to her one time, but she locked me in the box. She scares me more than anyone else," he responded. All of a sudden, the smacking sound resumed, louder than before. That was a horrid thing to say about Mama. Mama is good. Mama is nice. Mama is the only one who cares about me, said the pained voice of the man echoing down the tube. "It's ok. Mama isn't here. You're with your best friend. Feel free to tell me anything. This box, for example. I won't tell Mama. I promise." I responded with a certain wheedling to my voice. Dennis grew silent, seeming to mull over my request. I could tell from the stretching silence that I was close to winning him over. I racked my brain to find something this insane person could relate with. It hit me at that moment. In a moment of clarity, I knew what to say. I heard my mouth form the words, "My mama loved me a lot too. She also would try to protect me from the mean people as well. She thought if she kept me away from everyone, then I would never be hurt. By protecting, she didn't even know she was hurting me." "Does your mama accidentally hurt you too?" I heard a choking sob reverberate down the tunnel, followed by silence. My words seemed to have found a home. I allowed the words to sink in, letting them have the most effect. After a moment or two, I heard Dennis clearing his voice, making a valiant attempt to recover from the unexpected emotion. His raspy voice exclaimed, "Mama says she loves me, and that is why she has to punish me. She locks me in the box in the dark. I'm scared of the dark. The voices are too loud down there. There's not enough room in the tiny box for the two of us." "2 of us? I thought you were locked alone in the box," I questioned. "No, she locks me in the box with her. It is too cramped. It smells down there. I have to lay on top of her for there to be room for the 2 of us," he responded, sounding agitated again. "Dennis, tell me, where is this box?" I had a sinking feeling, as if my world was made of lead and I had just been tossed in the sea. I felt as if I could not keep my head above the water. All the rekindled hope I had been experiencing had suddenly turned to a fire in my innards. As if to prove my concerns, he opened his mouth and said, "Plot 1. Dread filled me. I knew the truth. Mama was dead, and here I am trapped in the box like him. There was no persuading him to let me go. Like me, he was equally buried alive. Even though he was still walking the surface world, I knew the human part of him was laying with his mother in plot 1. So here I lie, buried in an unmarked grave. No, that is not entirely true. I lie awake under the restful sleep of David Barnever. I do not know how long I will last 12 feet under the ground. I do know this: I am not alone. Dennis comes to keep me company and slide food down the chute 3 times a day. He is as dependable as the sun. Every day he arrives at the same time. Every day he retreats at the same time. I do not hold any ill will towards the broken man. Yes, he is my captor. Most definitely he ruined my life. However, I myself have come to understand a thing or two about loneliness. It can consume you. The actions of a lonely man should be forgiven. Who knows, if given the means, I might condemn someone to the box as well, if only to sate my unquenchable desire for companionship.